The final cry was one of triumph, a raw, primal sound that echoed in the sterile white delivery room. Jessica Miller, slick with sweat and utterly exhausted, fell back against the pillows, her heart hammering a rhythm of pure, unadulterated joy. A moment later, a new cry joined hers, smaller, more fragile, but fiercely alive. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, his voice warm over the top of his mask. He placed the swaddled infant on Jessica's chest. The weight was immediate, a grounding, perfect pressure. Jessica looked down at her son, her Leo, and felt a love so vast it seemed to erase the memory of the pain. She traced the soft line of his jaw, memorized the whirl of dark hair on his head. Her husband, Tom Harris, stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. He looked pale, his smile a little shaky. "He's perfect, Jess," he whispered, his voice thick. Jessica beamed up at him, her world complete. Her sister-in-law, Karen Harris, entered the room, her nurse's uniform crisp and immaculate. She moved with an unnerving efficiency that always set Jessica on edge. "All right, superstar," Karen said, her tone a little too bright. "Let's get this little guy weighed and checked over so Mom can get some rest." She held out her arms, and with a pang of reluctance, Jessica handed her son over. "Be quick," Jessica murmured, her eyes following the small bundle as Karen carried him from the room. Tom squeezed her shoulder. "She's the best, Jess." "He's in good hands." Jessica nodded, trying to let the exhaustion claim her, the image of her son's face already imprinted on her soul. She drifted into a light, dreamless sleep, the phantom weight of him still warm on her chest. She awoke to a profound silence. The cheerful beeping of the machines had been replaced by a low, steady hum. Tom was sitting in the chair by her bed, his head in his hands. Karen stood at the foot of the bed, her expression unreadable, her posture rigid. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, began to pool in Jessica's stomach. "Tom? Karen? Where's Leo?" Jessica asked, her voice raspy. Karen took a deep breath, her professional mask firmly in place. "Jessica," she began, her voice devoid of any real warmth. "There was a complication, a sudden severe pulmonary event. We did everything we could." The words didn't connect at first. They were just sounds, clinical and meaningless. Jessica stared at her, waiting for the punchline, for the part where she said, "Just kidding, he's right outside." But Karen's face remained a stony mask of feigned sympathy. "I'm so sorry," Karen continued. "He's gone." The world fractured. A scream tore from Jessica's throat, a sound she didn't recognize as her own, raw and ragged with disbelief. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a denial, a violent rejection of reality. "No," she gasped, shaking her head, trying to push herself up. "No, you're lying. I just held him. He was perfect." Tom rushed to her side, trying to hold her, but his touch felt weak, his words of comfort like handfuls of ash. "Jess, honey, please," he stammered, his own eyes welling with tears. But his grief felt hollow, a pale imitation of the yawning abyss that had just opened inside of her. Through her own blinding sorrow, she saw him look at his sister, a flicker of something, fear, deference, passing between them. Karen was in control. She was explaining things in a calm, steady voice, using medical terms that blurred into a meaningless drone. All Jessica knew was the void. The arms that had been full just an hour ago were now agonizingly, impossibly empty. 3 years, 1,095 days, each one a quiet testament to the shadow that had fallen over Jessica Miller's life. The acute, tearing agony of Leo's loss had eventually subsided, but it left behind a permanent ache, a hollow space in her soul that nothing could fill. Her marriage to Tom had become a fragile performance. They were two actors going through the motions, their shared trauma a chasm between them rather than a bridge. They spoke of weather and work and what to have for dinner, carefully navigating around the black hole in the center of their lives. For dinner, the only genuine light was her daughter Lily, whose boundless 4-year-old energy was a daily, life-affirming distraction. For Lily's sake, Jessica maintained the fragile peace. The nursery at the end of the hall remained untouched. Jessica couldn't bring herself to dismantle the crib or pack away the tiny clothes. Sometimes, in the dead of night, She would stand in the doorway and breathe in the scent of dust and faded dreams. Tom never went near it. He flinched if she ever brought up Leo's name, his face contorting in a mask of pain that, to Jessica, always seemed more like guilt. He threw himself into his work, his love expressed through paychecks and expensive gifts that felt like apologies for a crime he hadn't committed. Meanwhile, Karen Harris flourished. Just 6 months after Jessica lost Leo, Karen announced she and her husband were expecting. She claimed they had used a surrogate, a long and arduous process that had finally paid off. Her son, Daniel, was now a boisterous 3-year-old, the undisputed center of the Harris family universe. Karen had seamlessly transitioned into the role of a perfect doting mother, and she wielded her happiness like a weapon. Phone calls with her were an exercise in endurance. "Oh, you sound tired, Jessica," she'd say, a false note of concern in her voice. "You should really try to get out more. It's not healthy to dwell." She spoke of motherhood as if she had invented it. Her anecdotes about Daniel's latest achievements feeling like tiny, deliberate cuts. Each mention of her miracle baby was a cruel twist of the knife in Jessica's own wound. Now, Daniel's 3rd birthday was approaching, and the invitation, a glossy card with a picture of a beaming, brown-haired boy, sat on the kitchen counter like a threat. Jessica had no desire to go. The thought of watching Karen orchestrate a perfect party for her perfect son, while Jessica's own son lay in a tiny grave, was more than she could bear. "We have to go, Jess," Tom had insisted, his voice pleading. "She's my sister. It's for Daniel. We have to do it for the sake of the family." The family. The word felt like a lie. They weren't a family. They were a collection of broken people held together by secrets and obligations. But, as always, for the sake of a peace she no longer believed in, Jessica agreed. She would put on a dress, force a smile, and walk willingly into the heart of her own private hell. Karen's house was a monument to suburban perfection. The lawn was a manicured green carpet, the flower beds burst with color, and not a single toy littered the pristine walkway. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sugar and forced cheerfulness. Balloons in primary colors bobbed against the impossibly high ceilings of the open-plan living room, and a banner proclaiming, "Happy 3rd birthday, Daniel," was strung across a fireplace that looked like it had never been used. Jessica clutched Lily's small hand, her own smile feeling as thin and brittle as glass. Tom was already peeling away, drawn into a conversation with his father, leaving Jessica and Lily on the shore of a noisy sea of relatives and friends. Karen was in her element, a queen presiding over her court. She moved through the crowd with a plate of hors d'oeuvres, her laughter bright and commanding. She wore a white linen dress that highlighted her tan, looking radiant and utterly in control. When she spotted Jessica, her smile widened. "Jessica, I'm so glad you could make it," she gushed, kissing the air beside Jessica's cheek. "And look at you, Lily. You're getting so big." Her eyes swept over Jessica, a flicker of something, pity, or perhaps triumph in their depths. "It's so wonderful to have a house full of children's laughter, isn't it? You must have forgotten how much energy they have." The comment was perfectly innocent on the surface, but it landed like a dart. Jessica murmured a non-committal reply and guided Lily toward the backyard, where most of the children were playing. And she found a quiet spot on the patio steps, a safe distance from the chaos. She watched Daniel, the birthday boy. He was a handsome child with a sturdy build and a head of unruly brown hair, so much like Tom's. He was unwrapping a gift with intense concentration, his brow furrowed. As she watched him, Jessica felt a strange, unwelcome pang in her chest. It was more than the familiar ache of her own loss. It was a bizarre sense of connection, an almost magnetic pull toward this child who was not hers. She saw him trip and fall, skinning his knee. He let out a surprised wail, and the sound resonated deep inside her, a maternal instinct flaring up for a boy she barely knew. She quickly suppressed it, chiding herself. She was just projecting, pouring all her lost motherly love onto the most convenient target. It was grief, plain and simple. Still, she couldn't look away. Karen swooped in instantly, scooping Daniel up, kissing his knee, and murmuring soothing words. Watching her, Jessica felt a coldness spread through her. Karen's love for her son was fierce, possessive, and absolute. And for some reason, that felt terribly, terrifyingly wrong. The party churned on, a loud spectacle of cake, presents, and happy chaos. Jessica remained on the periphery, a ghost at the feast. She had managed to retreat with Lily to a quieter corner of the lush green lawn, near a sprawling oak tree that offered some shade from the bright afternoon sun. Lily, tired of the bigger kids' boisterous games, had cuddled up against Jessica's side, content to watch the world go by. The birthday boy Daniel, momentarily abandoned by his friends, who were now chasing a soccer ball, wandered over to inspect a line of ants marching near the tree's roots. He crouched down, his back to them, completely absorbed. A fragile peace settled over their little corner of the yard. It was then that Lily, in that way of small children who state profound truths as simple facts, leaned in close. Her breath was warm and smelled faintly of chocolate frosting as she whispered directly into Jessica's ear. "Mommy," she said, her voice soft but clear as a bell. "That little boy feels like my brother from your tummy." The words struck Jessica with the force of a physical blow. The air left her lungs. The cheerful sounds of the party faded into a distant, muffled roar. Her entire body went cold, a prickling chill spreading from her scalp down her spine. She looked at her daughter, whose face was open and earnest, completely unaware of the bomb she had just detonated. It was a child's fantasy, of course, a product of a 4-year-old's mysterious inner world. It had to be. But her gaze, now sharp and frantic, darted to Daniel. He was still crouched by the tree, but he had shifted, reaching out a chubby hand to poke at one of the ants. As he did, the sleeve of his blue polo shirt slid up his forearm, and Jessica saw it. Her heart stopped. There, stark against his tanned skin, was a small pale birthmark. It wasn't just any mark. It was a distinct, unmistakable shape. The perfect tiny crescent moon. A wave of dizziness washed over her. It was her father's birthmark. She had her father's birthmark on her shoulder. The doctors had told her such marks were often hereditary, and she had searched for it on her newborn son's body in those few precious moments she'd had with him. But in her joyous delirium, she hadn't found it. The whisper, the mark. The two facts slammed together in her mind, creating an impossible, horrific certainty. The vague, unsettling feeling she'd had all day crystallized into a single terrifying thought. She scrambled to her feet, her movements jerky. "Lily, honey, we have to go," she said, her voice a strained whisper. She scooped her daughter into her arms, ignoring Lily's small protest. She found Tom, muttered a frantic, incoherent excuse about Lily feeling sick, and fled. She didn't look at Karen. She couldn't. The car ride home was a blur of silent, screaming panic. The child's whisper had been the key, and the birthmark was the lock it had just turned. A door had been opened in her mind, and on the other side was a truth too monstrous to comprehend. The house was quiet. Lily was finally asleep, her peaceful breathing a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Jessica. She had waited, pacing the living room, her body thrumming with a terrifying energy. When she heard Tom's footsteps on the stairs, she turned to face him. Her grief had been burned away, replaced by something cold, hard, and sharp. There were no tears in her eyes. There was only ice. Tom stopped at the bottom of the stairs, his face etched with concern. "Jess, what's wrong? You were acting so strange. Is Lily okay?" "Lily is fine," Jessica said, her voice low and steady, each word a carefully placed stone. "She said something to me today at the party, while we were watching Daniel." She paused, letting the silence stretch, watching his face. "She told me he feels like her brother, the one from my tummy." Tom's face flickered. He opened his mouth, a dismissive, placating response already forming, but Jessica cut him off. "And then I saw it, Tom." Her voice dropped even lower, laced with a chilling certainty. "I saw the birthmark on his arm, the crescent moon, the one my father has, the one I was looking for when he was born." A strangled sound escaped Tom's throat. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty gray pallor. "Jessica, you're not thinking straight," he stammered, his hands fluttering uselessly at his sides. "You're grieving. You're seeing things. It's a coincidence." But his denial was weak, transparent. His eyes couldn't meet hers. "It's not a coincidence," she said, taking a step toward him. Look at me, Tom. Look at me and tell me I'm wrong. He flinched, taking a step back as if she had struck him. His carefully constructed facade began to crack, the pieces falling away to reveal the terrified, weak man underneath. He stumbled back and sank onto the sofa, his head falling into his hands. A choked sob broke from his lips. The confession didn't come all at once. It came in broken, guilt-ridden fragments, a torrent of shame and cowardice that filled the silent room. Karen had masterminded it all, her obsession with having a child, her jealousy of Jessica, her position at the hospital. It all converged into one monstrous plan. She had printed a fake death certificate, filed the fraudulent paperwork for a private adoption, telling the family she had used a surrogate. And Tom had let her. She said you were too fragile, Jess. He wept, his words muffled by his hands. She said the stress of a baby would have broken you after your difficult pregnancy. She said it was for the best, that this way the baby would still be in the family. I was scared. I was so scared, and she took care of everything. He looked up at her then, his face a mess of tears and self-loathing. I'm a coward, Jessica. I'm so sorry. Jessica stared at him, feeling nothing. The man she had married, the man she had grieved with, was a stranger. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it had cauterized the wound of her sorrow. In that moment, her husband died, and her enemy took his place. The next morning, Jessica woke with a terrifying clarity. The fog of betrayal had cleared, leaving behind a single diamond-hard purpose. She was going to get her son back. The woman who had wept for 3 years was gone. In her place was a mother, a lioness, and she would burn the world down to protect her cubs. Her first call was not to the police, but to a name she'd gotten from a friend, Mark Davies, a top-rated family law attorney in the city. She sat in his plush office that afternoon, recounting the entire nightmarish story with a calm, methodical precision that surprised even herself. Mr. Davies, a man with kind eyes but a razor-sharp mind, listened without interruption. When she finished, he leaned forward, his expression serious. Jessica, I believe you, he said, his voice firm. But what you have is an incredible story, a child's intuition and a gut feeling. What we need is irrefutable scientific proof. In a court of law, Karen's story, a registered nurse with a legal adoption via surrogacy, corroborated by your husband, will look solid. Your story, I'm sorry to say, will sound like the ravings of a grieving mother. We need DNA. The word hung in the air, solid and powerful. A plan began to form, cold and calculated. They needed a sample of Daniel's DNA, and they needed to get it without arousing Karen's suspicion. The key, sickeningly, was Tom. He was now her tool, his guilt a lever she could pull. That evening, she laid out the plan to him. He was a wreck, hollow-eyed and willing to do anything she asked. You will call Karen, Jessica instructed, her voice leaving no room for argument. You'll tell her you're worried about me, that I'm not myself, and you think it would be good for me to see Daniel again, to try and build a normal relationship. You'll invite her and Daniel over for a play date with Lily this weekend. Tom nodded numbly, reaching for his phone. The day of the play date was the most agonizing of Jessica's life. She played the part of the fragile, recovering mother, forcing smiles and making small talk with the woman who had stolen her child. While Karen was in the kitchen with Tom, Jessica sat on the floor of the living room with the children. Her heart pounded in her ears as she watched Daniel run a bright red hairbrush through his thick brown hair. When he tossed it aside to chase Lily, Jessica saw her chance. In one fluid motion, she accidentally knocked over her purse, its contents spilling across the rug. As she bent to collect her things, her hand closed around the hairbrush, swiftly tucking it into a small Ziploc bag she had hidden in an inside pocket. Her hands were trembling, but her face, when she looked up at Karen returning to the room, was a mask of placid calm. That afternoon, she personally drove the sealed bag to an expedited lab Mr. Davies had recommended. The wait for the results would be excruciating, but for the first time in 3 years, Jessica felt a flicker of hope. It was the feeling of a battle finally begun. The call came 4 days later. Jessica was sitting at her kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, when her phone buzzed. It was Mr. Davies. We have it, he said, his voice taut with suppressed excitement. It's a 99.999% match, Jessica. He's your son. Jessica closed her eyes, and a single hot tear escaped and slid down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of profound, earth-shattering validation. The truth was real. It was on paper. It was undeniable. It's time, she said, her voice steady. The next phone call she made was the performance of her life. She dialed Karen's number, took a deep, shuddering breath, and forced a quaver into her voice. Karen? It's Jessica. Jessica, Karen's voice was wary. Is everything okay? Yes, I think so, Jessica stammered, playing the part of a woman on the edge. I wanted to apologize for how I've been. That play date. It was nice. I think I'm finally ready to move on. I feel like I need to talk to you to clear the air for the family's sake. Can I please come over this afternoon? There was a pause. Jessica could almost hear the smug satisfaction clicking into place in Karen's mind. The final victory. The emotionally unstable sister-in-law was finally capitulating. Of course, Jessica, Karen said, her voice dripping with false magnanimity. My door is always open. When Jessica arrived at the pristine suburban house, she was not alone. Flanking her were Mr. Davies, holding a sleek leather briefcase, and a stern professional woman in a navy blue pantsuit whom Jessica knew only as Agent Reynolds from Child Protective Services. Karen opened the door, a triumphant, pitying smile already on her face. The smile vanished the instant she saw Jessica's companions. Her face went blank with confusion, then clouded with suspicion. Jessica, what is this? She demanded, her voice sharp. We had an arrangement to talk, Jessica said calmly, stepping past her into the immaculate living room. So, let's talk. Karen followed them in, her eyes darting nervously between the three intruders in her perfect home. I don't understand what's happening, she said, her bravado faltering. Jessica didn't say a word. She simply walked to the gleaming glass coffee table, and from a folder Mr. Davies handed her, she pulled out a single document. She placed it squarely in the center of the table. The lab report. 3 years ago, you stole my son from me, Jessica said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of an anvil. Karen stared at the paper, her face ashen. You're insane, she breathed. That's a lie. This, Jessica said, tapping the paper, is a DNA analysis. It proves with 99.999% certainty that I am his mother. His name is Leo, and he's my son. Karen's world imploded. Her face crumpled from denial into pure animalistic terror. It was then that Agent Reynolds stepped forward, her voice official and unforgiving. Karen Harris, my name is Agent Reynolds with CPS. You are the subject of a criminal investigation regarding kidnapping, falsification of public records, and parental fraud. You need to tell me where the child is. Now. The fortress of lies Karen had built over 3 years had just been leveled by a single sheet of paper. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal proceedings that Jessica observed from a distance, shielded by her lawyer. Karen Harris was arrested, her face, contorted in disbelief and rage, splashed across the local news. The story of the nurse who stole her brother's baby was a media sensation, but Jessica refused all interviews, focusing her entire being on the only thing that mattered. Her divorce from Tom was swift and uncontested. Shamed and disowned by his own family, he signed away all his rights and assets, leaving Jessica with a massive settlement and, more importantly, sole, undisputed custody of her 2 children. He disappeared from their lives, a ghost haunting a past she was determined to forget. The process of bringing her son home was delicate and slow, guided by child psychologists. He was Daniel Harris, a boy who knew only one mother. To him, Jessica was an aunt he'd met a few times. They didn't rush it. They started with supervised visits, then day trips with Lily, whose simple, unconditional acceptance of her new brother was a healing balm for them all. It was Lily who first started calling him Leo, a name he initially found strange but soon adopted as his own. There were moments of confusion and tears, but there were also moments of pure magic. The first time Leo reached for Jessica's hand, the first time he called her mommy without prompting. Each small milestone was a victory, slowly stitching their fractured family back together. Months later, the The world of pristine suburbs, hushed secrets, and legal battles felt a lifetime away. Jessica had used the settlement to buy a charming house in a new city, hundreds of miles away. It had a big, sprawling backyard with an old oak tree perfect for climbing. One bright sunny afternoon, she sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching her children. Lily, now 5, was showing Leo, almost 4, how to build a tower out of brightly colored blocks. He laughed, a clear, happy sound that filled the air as he knocked it over. He had her eyes. He had her father's birthmark. He was hers. A profound sense of peace washed over Jessica, a peace she once thought she'd never feel again. The shadow was gone, replaced by the brilliant sunshine of a new day. She was no longer a victim, no longer defined by grief or betrayal. She was simply a mother, watching her 2 beautiful children play together, safe and whole and finally free.